This is How About That Podcast, a show dedicated to all things Dallas Cowboys. With both objective and subjective perspectives, How About That Podcast is your place to hear about America's team. Now, here's Joseph Hoyt and Danny Morales.
Hello and welcome. This is a big day for us. We've been looking forward to this for a long time. This is the debut of Cowboy Carter by Beyonce. We've been looking forward to it. The music is out. Other big things in the news. Opening day was yesterday for baseball. We had some crazy action. The UFL starts tomorrow. It's my fiance's brother's 27th birthday today. Big day. But I think I'm forgetting something, Dan.
I believe this is episode 1 of the How About That podcast.
How About That podcast? That is exactly what I was missing, and that's what we're doing here today. Welcome, everyone. My name is Joseph Hoyt. I'm the Dallas Cowboys beat reporter for Lone Star Live and Advanced Local, and we are excited to bring you another new Cowboys podcast. I know there's a lot of them, but I think that we're going to be kind of unique because we have, some interesting perspectives. I think we got the objective perspective from me as a reporter, and then we also have some subjectiveness. Danny, I'm going to give you a little bit of intro about you. Danny's not a reporter. Danny is actually a lifelong Cowboys fan who grew up in San Francisco, California, which is kind of like ordering a steak every time you go to a vegan cafe. That's enemy territory. And I think it kind of emboldened Danny. Danny, former all-county guard at 180 pounds in high school, Tom Brady's got nothing on him. But the thing that we really wanted to hear from you is, I think every podcast is trying to relate to fans and trying to kind of, get inside their mind. And I thought, why not better than to not only have one of my best friends on the podcast, but to have someone who is a fan. Danny, tell me a little bit about yourself and your fanhood.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, growing up in the Bay Area, it's hostile territory out here. You're surrounded by the Niner faithful. And so I've been a Cowboys defender for 30 years now, and it hasn't been easy. And seeing our season come to an end at Levi's Stadium has been tough, but I would say it's hardened me a little bit, and it's made me the Cowboys fan I am today, for better or for worse. Maybe a little too faithful. But yeah, that's the perspective I'm going to give as a Cowboys fan. Like you said, I'm not a reporter. I don't have any of that background, but diehard Cowboys fan. I'll always love this team no matter what, even though they make it tough for me. But yeah, that's always who I'm going to be.
I heard Jordan Spieth talking the other day on the Up and Adams show, and Jordan Spieth is the same age as us. We're all 30 years old here, and he was talking about, hey, being a Cowboys fan is painful, and maybe one day it'll be worth it. And I think it's kind of worth reminding to people that it's been since 1995 since not only they've been to a Super Bowl, they haven't been to an NFC Championship since then. So, Danny, you've seen a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, especially this last season.
And I question that, honestly. Like, even last year, I had to turn the game off at halftime against Green Bay. It was that painful. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I got to find a new team. Like, my health can't take this. I'm like, it would just be easier if I liked, like, the Panthers or something where I didn't have the expectation. But it's like, we're just good enough every year where I expect to do something, and then we do nothing. And I question myself, but it's like, it's the Cowboys. I love them. I'm always going to love them. It's a tough relationship.
Yeah, I heard someone said it's a toxic relationship, and I think that's kind of a good way to define it.
Absolutely. It's not good for you, but you keep going back. People tell you to leave, but you just got to stay. That's what it is for me.
Yeah, man. It's just dripping in toxicity. And not only do we have Danny on the podcast, we also have producer extraordinaire Joey Alberti, who's on our ones and twos. Joey, obviously, you're not a Cowboys fan either, but you are an NFL fan. You're an NFL reporter. You're a trending reporter as well for us. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into some other things.
Yeah, I just started working here at Lone Star / Gulf Live in late October, early November. Been helping you with Cowboys stuff. Also been doing a little Texans Saints coverage, also college football, also a little college basketball. I don't know. I'm all over the place. And I'm very excited about this podcast to kind of see how the two of you clash on this. So I'm just going to try to make sure it's a controlled chaos, so to speak.
Yeah, there you go. And I think it's worth kind of noting a little bit. I kind of touched on a little bit. We are lifelong friends. A little bit more about our relationship. Danny and I first grew up as competitors, on the AYSO soccer fields in California.
Oh yeah.
You kind of recognize when the other team has a guy that like is talented, but you kind of want to like fight him. And that was kind of Danny from the moment I met him. Then we started playing baseball, St. Veronica's versus St. Robert's. That got heated. Then we went to the same high school, Junipero Serra High School, where the likes of Tom Brady, Barry Bonds, and then us two kind of overachieving 5'8" guys also went to. We played football together, won a CCS championship, something Tom Brady never did. Sorry, Joey. I know he won a lot of Super Bowls for those Patriots and the Bucks, but he can't have that, but we can. I've got a ring. Danny, we got rings that he doesn't.
Sure do. Look at it every day.
Yeah. So, I mean, he couldn't hang with us on that. And then, obviously just been friends ever since. I was in Danny's wedding. He's going to be in mine. So, I think that one thing we're trying to give you guys is not only an objective or subjective perspective, but like me and Danny go a long back. We're friends. Hopefully, our trash talk to each other or doesn't get too much on this podcast. But I'm looking forward to it. Dan, do you have anything to talk about our friendship, or is there a moment that, you still think about, our competitive streak or anything like that?
Oh man, where do I start? I would say practices for sure. Going against Hoyt, he was the scout team defender versus our first team offense, and this guy knew the plays, so he would cheat every single time, and I'd get so frustrated with Hoyt. But hey, he's a competitor. I love it. He made me better. But yeah, when the idea of the podcast came up, I was like, this sounds awesome, because the amount of times me and you have talked on the phone, fantasy football, Cowboys, whatever. You look at the phone, it's like 45 minutes have gone by. We're just talking football. And I kind of want to bring that here to the podcast, just make it sound natural, like two guys just talking sports.
Which is exactly what we're going to do. And I think, speaking of fantasy football, it's worth noting that you kind of are the Cowboys of our fantasy football league. I mean, you do really well. You always lead the league in points scored. You got a lot of hype coming in the playoffs, and then it just doesn't get there.
Some things you can't control, Hoyt. I can't control injuries. You know what I mean? I could put my guys in a position to succeed, but at the end of the day, I can't play the game for them.
Yeah, and I think that's part of just you as an owner, though, of that fantasy team. And I mean, I win often. I don't know. There's no excuses here. So
I'm kind of the Jerry Jones of fantasy football. You could say.
Are you going all in this year?
Every year I go all in.
Well, I think that's a good segue. Now that you know a little bit about us, let's actually start talking some Dallas Cowboys. And I think before we talk about where the Cowboys are going, where they've been, I think it's important to give a little bit of what I call the Cowboys State of the Union. And I think we need to know exactly where we are right now, Friday, March 29th. And so I think what we're going to do is give a little bit of an objective State of the Union, and then Danny's going to give a little bit of the fan perspective, kind of just, a little bit of just kind of what I imagine is a little bit of a roller coaster this offseason, in terms of just potential hype, and we'll a little bit dive into a little bit more in that. But I think for my State of the Union, the big theme I want to hit on is this idea that you guys have heard of quiet quitting, right? That's kind of a slogan for some workers and people. Hey, quiet quitting is the idea that you're kind of out of that job, but you're still kind of showing up every day, even though you're kind of not really there. And I think the theme that kind of comes to me about this Cowboys offseason is the idea that they're not quiet quitting, but I kind of feel like they're quiet rebuilding. And I think the case for that is, hey, we're going to say that we're going to show up every day. We're going to come to the offseason. We're going to go to the combine. We're going to say that we're going to get a deal done with Dak. Don't worry, he's a Cowboy for life. CeeDee Lamb, Cowboy for life. Micah Parsons, one of the best pass rushers, will never let go. Obviously, the all-in comment has been kind of the theme of the offseason. And yet, there's not a lot of production behind the comments. There's not a lot of substance behind what's been said. And I think that's kind of obvious. If you look at the scoreboard right now, is what I call it. They've had 10 departures, 5 free agents re-signed, and 1 external free agent acquired, and Eric Kendricks. None of those guys, the incoming guys, are making more than $3 million next year. It's all very vet minimums, which, and I know, Danny, you'll probably talk about this, kind of has been their MO for the last couple seasons, from an off-season perspective. Yeah. Last year, who was the most notable free agent you think they signed last year?
Gilmore, I guess.
And that was a trade. I mean,
Yeah.
but from like a free agent perspective, I know they re-signed Donovan Wilson obviously last year. I'm struggling to even remember some of the just free agents. Chuma Adoga, you know.
Malik Hooker a little before that. I mean, it's not, they don't go big game hunting. That's just not their style.
No, and I think it was either 2015 or 2016. But the last time they signed an external free agent for double digit money per year was Greg Hardy, who signed a 1 year, I think, $11 million deal, either in 2015 or 2016. Kind of tells you a little bit about where they've been. So the theme I keep coming back to is you can say you're all in, and now they're saying they're kind of Jerry Jones has talked about the owners being we're going to kind of do more with less, which is a hard pivot. I just kind of think that they're quiet rebuilding. And I think the biggest tell of that is how they're handling the Dak Prescott situation. And I think you can look at it in a couple different ways. Sure, there's not a lot of urgency currently, to sign him. He's signed through next season. But I think when you throw in the idea that he has a no trade clause, he has a no tag clause, which I think was a huge thing for Todd France to get into his contract last time. I still feel like there's a little bit of urgency even now, especially considering the fact that they didn't do a deal before free agency. If they would have done a deal before free agency, extended him, moved some of that cap hit back, so they go ahead and acquire some of these guys in free agency. I get not trying to be a big game hunter, but hey, going out and getting, a center, that could potentially compete with Brock Hoffman, like that's something you could think of. Or shoot, we talked about a lot last year, the run defense, and wasn't up to standard. They drafted Mozzie Smith trying to replicate it. That wasn't up to standard.
It was non-existent.
It was non-existent. I mean, geez. I mean, look what I think. Danny? Did you see what Jordan Love said? I think on Micah Parsons' podcast.
I did not.
He talked about how, like, hey, just to be blunt with you, Micah, we saw that you guys had no linebackers, and we said we're going to run it on you, and we're going to run play action off of that, and we're going to thrive. And that's what Green Bay did in that playoff game. And I mean, if you look at it, they literally had two linebackers on their active roster last year for that game. And I know they brought up Buddy Johnson, I believe, for that game, or maybe Malik Jefferson, or maybe both. But they had Damone Clark and Marquise Bell.
An undrafted safety who you're going to plug in at linebacker. Like, that's not going to replace Van Der Esch. I don't know where in your head you think that's going to work in the run game. It's just not. You're too small in the box.
And that's what Jordan Love talked about. It's like, hey, we're going to attack that. So, long story short, my theme, my State of the Union is that the Cowboys are currently in midst a quiet rebuilding phase. They're leaving the option open, obviously, to not bring Dak Prescott back, which, is kind of wild in itself. I talked about it a little bit. I cannot imagine what the market would be if he hit the free agency. Kirk Cousins got 4 years, 180, coming off of, a season-ending injury at the age of 35. So imagine what Dak Prescott would get. That's my theme. That's my State of the Union. They could wake up. This quiet rebuilding could not be a thing. They could make another trade. They could sign Stephon Gilmore back. They could make a trade for a guy like another wide receiver to go with CD and Brandon Cooks. They could bring in a running back that has a lot of juice. There's still a couple out there that are at least interesting. They could draft one in the second round. Maybe Trey Benson or Jonathan Brooks comes in and is fantastic. But right now, from an objective perspective, I think they're leaving the door open for a rebuild next season. I didn't even bring up the fact that all the coaches are on 1-year deals. So that option's open. That's my perspective on it. Danny, as a fan, how has this offseason been for you? And what are your just current thoughts about the team, the franchise, as we move into kind of phase 2 of the offseason?
I got a lot to say about that, but you brought up a point that kind of made me think about something. It's like this whole idea of a rebuild. It's like, why do you give up a fourth for Trey Lance when you have a pretty legitimate backup in Cooper Rush already on your roster? And it doesn't help when you look what the Steelers gave up for Justin Fields. And it's like, wow, we gave up a fourth for Lance. So what is their long-term plan with him? Is this part of that quiet rebuild? Was the plan all along to not pay Dak and then slide in Trey Lance? I don't know. It's kind of puzzling to me. It's kind of made me wonder, like, is that what their plan was the whole time with Trey Lance?
But that's also a guy they didn't do a 5th-year option on. And obviously that's expensive, and he hasn't really warranted that 5th-year option. But to your point, if you wanted him to be the future, and you worked a lot with him last year, Scott Tolzien and Brian Schottenheimer before every game. Well, not Schottenheimer, Tolzien before every game was working with him on the field. He got a lot of practice. The preseason might be some of the highest ratings for Cowboys we see because people want to tune into Trey Lance, to be honest. Sorry to cut you off. You can continue, but to your point, why would you do that?
I don't know. It's a little perplexing to me. It's kind of intriguing because you don't really know what you have in Trey Lance. You could have a superstar. The Niners gave up on him pretty quick, but it's an interesting prospect that you have in your quarterback room that I'd kind of like to see. So that's just kind of my point on that. But as a fan, my kind of state of the union with this whole thing is when Jerry says we're all in, you kind of take that with a grain of salt. Being a Cowboys fan for 30 years now and having never seen this all in concept, it's like, it's the same thing every single year. It's like the biggest names I've ever seen signed was like Brandon Carr or Ken Hamlin. It's like, this is their idea of big game hunting. And it's like, you look around the league and the teams that are winning are the ones that are spending these big bucks. Philly, the Niners, Buffalo goes out and gets some big guys. Like, in order to win, you got to go out and get outside free agents. And to the Cowboys' credit, they have drafted well. They like to retain their own, but to rely solely on your own guys, I don't know if it's an ego thing or it's like we want to win with our guys, the guys we drafted. We don't want to go out and get other guys. But as a fan, especially in the NFC East, and you see what Philly does year after year, you see what the Commanders have done this year. Is that going to pay off? Who knows? For them, it usually doesn't. The Giants are spending money. Doesn't usually work out for them. But my point is, like, if you want to compete with the big dogs, the Niners and Philly, it's like maybe you should take a page out of their book and go out and get some big names. The McCaffreys or the Hassan Reddicks, all these big guys that are getting, it works. And so when Jerry tells us as a fan base that we're going to go all in, and then you see all these big names fly off the board in the first week, first day. Meanwhile, the Cowboys re-signed Trent Sieg. It's like, oh, we secured our long snapper. That's great. But to do nothing and sit back, and it's like you see all these holes. You lose Tyron Smith. You have no center. Dorrance Armstrong. Like, all these key components of your team, Dante Fowler, these depth pieces, and you're doing nothing to replenish it. It's mind-blowing. The Eric Kendricks signing, I like it. It fills a need, but it doesn't really change much for me. And so I think if you go into the draft, you're putting yourself in a position where you have to draft for need as opposed to best player available. And that's never really a good spot you want to be in the draft, in my opinion, especially sitting at 24.
No, and to your point, the talk was, hey, let's fill needs so we can draft best player available. And I know that's the goal for every single team in free agency. But Danny, seemingly they've opened up more holes since the beginning of free agency started. Like, I envisioned that they were going to go out and maybe sign, another defensive tackle to make up for the loss of Neville Gallimore. Or, hey, you lost Dante Fowler and Dorrance Armstrong. Maybe there's a cheap defensive end with a vet minimum that you can go in. And they still could. If you also look at the Cowboys free agency strategy over the last couple of years, they do make a lot of signings post-draft. So, I mean, there's still chances to fill them. But it seems like there's just a lot of holes on the ship, man. And it's hard not to think, this ship sank last year dramatically in the playoffs again. Probably correct me if I'm wrong, Danny. I would say during this 3-year run with McCarthy, the worst playoff ending.
Oh, by far.
So now you're just going to run it back with a ship with holes, but oh, by the way, you kind of made more. It's objectively, that's where I'm kind of coming in. Also, new drinking game. If I say objectively, you got to take a sip. Advanced Local is not liable for that. But that's kind of the perspective I have on it. And I mean, we'll see, man. I like, to your point, I like Eric Kendricks. I do like Jordan Lewis coming back. I thought that was a very smart move considering how well he played at the end of last season. And, I think that allows Deron Bland to play outside and Trayvon Diggs to play outside. So that's a pretty good trio. Curious, Danny, I've been kind of, this is an idea I've had. I think Deron Bland's best position actually is in the slot. Do you think just quick aside, do you think naturally he's more of a slot or an outside corner? Obviously he played well at both.
I kind of like him on the outside. That's just my take on it. I kind of like his straight line deep speed. That's just me. But he makes plays in both. I know he's a PFF darling as a cornerback, so he gets it done everywhere. But ideally, I'd like to see him on the outside. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think them signing Jordan Lewis tells you what they think ultimately.
Yeah,
Yeah, because if they want him in the slot, maybe they actually take that vet minimum, or not vet minimum, but the little amount of money that Jordan Lewis got and devote it to the Stephon Gilmore fund and try to bring him back and go outside with him and Duran in the slot. Anyways, but yeah, so kind of to sum up the state of the union, the Cowboys. Uh, Give me your just TLDR. You're too long didn't read for those who are not familiar with the acronym. Just state of your thoughts on the Cowboys. Give me like a sense of just like, you know what, this is exactly where I'm thinking about them right now.
Cowboys offseason to me is like the definition of insanity. They do the same thing every single year, and it's like they expect something different. We never get that. We'll probably go 12-5 and then get bounced in the first round unless they change. That's just my opinion. And there's glaring holes all over this roster going into the draft. And so, how do I feel as a Cowboys fan currently? Not very good. I feel like our roster is worse than last year. You lose Dan Quinn, replace him with Mike Zimmer. Is that an upgrade? I don't know. Time will tell. But my optimism is not too high right now.
When were you the most optimistic in recent memory?
Oh,
Was it going into last year?
probably to start last year. Looking at that secondary we had, the O line was for the most part intact. I was feeling pretty good going to the offseason or going into the season. But yeah, obviously that ended the way it did. So
And one thing I think we should touch on too, the roster is not, in my opinion, as yours as well, is not as filled, and we still have an offseason to go, so holes can be filled. Is not as good as it was last season, right?
no.
That's kind of our stance on that for right now, and obviously things can change. But I think it's worth noting they still had nine Pro Bowlers last year. Like, and I know a couple of them, are gone, but this is still a team that's very talented. You still have a quarterback in his prime, even though he's on entering an expiring deal. They still have pieces to make a run. It's not unfathomable. This is not, I don't think, doomsday. I think, and Danny, correct me if I'm wrong, the biggest frustration for fans is, okay, you sold us this idea that, we were going to live in this paradise. And meanwhile, it's a trailer park of an offseason down by, an affordable area. Like it just wasn't what they were preached or wasn't what they were promised.
Absolutely. It's like if you know you're strapped against the cap, if you know all this stuff, it's like why are you going to come out and say you're creating this false sense of hope that as Cowboy fans we already naturally have. We're Cowboys fans. We just assume we're going to win every year. And so when your owner comes out and tells you that, and then he lets you down, it hurts a little more. You know, it hurts a little more. And yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow. But again, as a Cowboy fan, I kind of remain faithful, thinking they'll do something. Um, but then I think to assume you can fill the back end of your roster with all these third, fourth tier free agents and win is just mind blowing to me. When your biggest competition is going out and signing all these big names.
That's got to be frustrating, right? Like even the Eagles, I think eventually are a good example, right? Because they're going to have the Jalen Hurts contract is going to start weighing heavier very soon, right? And
Yeah.
it's not like they have a rookie QB, and yet they still made some moves that you go like, man,
How does Howie Roseman get this done every offseason? It's like, where is this money coming from? How is this roster management even possible? And it's like, what? How about Dallas maybe take a page out of that book? Because we do the complete opposite. And it's like, you get the update, oh, Eagles signed such and such. It's like, how is that even possible?
what was your reaction when they got Saquon?
I want to vomit. Behind that O line, with those receivers and their tight end, I'm like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And how are we going to stop that? Oh, we got Marquise Bell to fill the A gap. It's like, no, we don't. Mozzie Smith, he's good, but we need a big step in year two. So it's like, look what your rivals are doing and what are we doing to counter that? I guess that's one of the most frustrating parts. It's like they're playing chess, we're playing checkers. It's like they're so far ahead of what we're doing in the offseason. it just feels like we're setting ourselves up for failure again.
And comparison is ultimately the thief of joy, right?
Yeah,
Like it's hard to look at that stuff and be like, wait, the scoreboard. Going back to the scoreboard, we've lost 10 guys, especially to Dallas Northeast and Washington D.C. with Dan Quinn.
I like
Um,
that. Dallas Northeast.
working project. We'll see how that goes.
That's a good one.
But we haven't done. We've had just Eric Hendricks, and Eric Hendricks is great, but I mean, even Eric Hendricks is not the All-Pro Eric Hendricks that we saw a couple years ago. Maybe he gets it back with Mike Zimmer. Who knows? But to your point, it's the comparison. If I could sum up your thoughts, Dan,
Yeah.
just listening to you, I like to quote Ted Lasso, the TV show. It's the hope that kills you. And I think that might be a little bit of a summary right now of the recent memory of being a Cowboys fan, correct?
That's spot on.
Joey, really quickly, I want to go to you as someone who covers the NFL as well and isn't on the boots, on the ground with the Cowboys. So you're a little bit like you cover them, but a little bit outside. You're not too close to the sun here. What are your thoughts on just the Cowboys, either just the last 5 years, seeing what they did this offseason? I'm just curious what you had to say.
Well, thinking about Cowboys fans, I do feel very, very bad, especially for the ones that are Danny's age, that are 30 years old, that just missed that like 95, like mid early 90s cutoff of Super Bowls and all that stuff. Your life as a Cowboys fan is literally just losing and never reaching expectations, which I feel very bad about. And I do like your theory a lot about this like quiet rebuild that the Cowboys might be doing. And I just I completely agree that I don't think they get 12 wins unless they do something crazy. But I'm like, as you guys are talking, I'm just sitting here trying to think like, what could they possibly do right now that would be an quote unquote all in move? And I don't know. I like a big trade, but what would they trade? Just draft picks? Could they make an all in move in the draft? Who could they take in the draft that would be all in? Like, I don't even know what one position in the draft could be all in. They don't need a quarterback. They have a good wide receiver. They have a great edge rusher. They have good corners. So, I mean, you're going to go all in on a offensive tackle. I mean, I guess if they trade up and do that, but this is so deep, they don't even need a trade up to get an offensive tackle. So I really don't know what they could possibly do at this point, unless it's a big trade. And I'd be very shocked if they did that.
Yeah, I tweeted out maybe last week, like, hey, you can take BPA at 24 if you have just a plethora of holes, because guess what? You're filling for need and you're taking the best player available because you have so many options there. So that's just smart thinking there. All right, well, let's transition a little bit to just a kind of a brief little segue into just news and updates. I think this is kind of good to not only counter our fodder with what we're talking about with some actual things happening. Came out of owners meetings was this past week. Came out of that was the fact that your first and second round picks last year, Mozzie Smith and Luke Schoonmaker, both had shoulder operations. The good news, they will be good to go by training camp, according to the Cowboys. The bad news, we talk a lot about, or Mike McCarthy, talks a lot about the importance of the first and second and third year jumps. And those are two rookies from last season that didn't perform up to expectations that now are going to be missing a big chunk of the offseason. We found out today that the Cowboys start in April 15th. So, the offseason activity. So things are coming up. And you're not going to have your first two picks, plus your third round pick in DeMarion Overshown, also coming off injury. So that was kind of that's kind of some news there. Mike McCarthy also talked at the in Orlando for the annual meeting. And one piece that I thought was notable, Dan, was the fact that, and it's kind of obvious, but Rico Dowdle is not going to be the last addition or re-signing, to that backfield. And I like, we talked about, I wrote about Rico last year, wrote a big profile, and, he runs beautifully angry, and he's fun to watch, man. And I think that he definitely warrants more carries, but you can't go in with that being your lone option for the star.
No offense to Rico Dowdle. I mean, what'd you say? Beautifully angry?
He runs beautifully angry, which I do like that. Mike McCarthy talked a lot about that, and he runs angry. And it's you don't have to question that.
No, I'll give him that. I think he's good. He's a good little change of pace, third down back, something like that. Is he the guy? I would like to think not. I would hope that the Cowboys don't view him as that. That's just my kind of take on that. And Deuce Vaughn as well. Saying that we haven't quite done anything yet, going into the draft with Rico Dowdle and Deuce Vaughn as our backfield with no center other than Brock Hoffman, it's a little scary because the successful Cowboys teams in the past were built on that run game. So I think once we can kind of, and I think they're going to go into the draft and address that, which we'll touch on later. But no, that was just kind of my take on Rico Dowdle. I like him. I don't love him. He's a good change of pace. We need something else.
And you know this too. I mean, look at the Cowboys' most successful run games. It's when they had two guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they had, I mean, specifically in recent memory, when Zeke and Tony Pollard, 2021 was probably the best example when they had that, just two guys that could play off of each other, two different styles. The one thing I'm curious about, because I think that they're going to try to replicate that in the draft, is how would you actually define Rico Dowdle, though? So if Rico Dowdle is going to be one of those two, because he's not like a super speedy back, but he's also, he's not the big bruising. I think I would categorize him a little bit more in the physical, bigger running back mold. But
yeah,
so then I think you need a speedy guy to go with that. So, I mean, I don't know you, Dan. The guy that I kind of want them to check out is J.K. Dobbins. I've been kind of preaching that. Why not? I mean, if that's a complete vet minimum, risk reward is, in my opinion, pretty high. Obviously proven to be an injury liability. But what do you think about adding a speed back with Rico?
To Dobbins, I do like that considering who's left. I think he has a visit scheduled with someone. I just saw that. It wasn't the Cowboys, unfortunately. It'd be a very Cowboys move to sign someone on a rookie, or not a rookie, but a minimum prove-it deal. Like you said, low risk, high reward. So of the remaining free agents, I do like Dobbins. But I'd rather just go with what you have and just draft early, give someone an opportunity.
And I don't know about you, like the idea of or bringing in like a Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and it kind of feels a little bit of like replicating. I don't that wouldn't, as a pair with Rico, and maybe we're just talking about depth at this point, but I don't know, that wouldn't excite me too much if I was a Cowboys fan.
I was kind of hoping for A.J. Dillon, to be honest. That was kind of my little off-season man crush. I'm like, wow, old school Cowboys will sure up the line in the draft. We'll put A.J. Dillon back there. I'm having flashbacks to the Marion Barber days where we're just bruising people. Jason Witten over the middle. None of this deep balls, or that'll set up our deep ball. That'll help Dak. So I was kind of hoping for that, and then to see him re-sign with Green Bay hurt a little bit. But yeah, we need to address that position for sure.
You got to find someone with quads as big as A.J. Dillon's. Once you are able to do that, then you have found the key to successful football. That's my take. That's my perspective. That's the scientific theory. It's foolproof. That's what it is.
I don't think there's a human on this planet with quads that compare to A.J. Dillon. So you may be looking for a while.
That's true. Maybe there's like a surgery for it. You know what I mean? You can just kind of get increased quad surgery. I don't know.
You can get surgery for anything now, so wouldn't surprise me.
That's true. I mean, people don't know, but Danny's mustache is surgically put on. Actually,
this is not
it's
real.
Pretty impressive.
This is not real.
All right. Well, we're going to transition again now, and this is something I'm pretty excited about, Dan, because I haven't watched in a while. But in college, I got really into The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, and then we also had March Madness going on currently. We have Sweet 16 stuff right there. By the time you hear this, that'll be a little bit old. We're in Elite Eight territory. Shoot, we might even be in Final Four, depending on what time this comes out. But we're going to title this The Cowboys Chase for the Rose. And the idea is we're creating a 16-person bracket of prospects that kind of fit Dallas's needs at 24 and also kind of fit the talent level that we think that, would be appropriate there. And what we're going to do is we're going to duke it out. We're going to argue. And we're going to try to find who we think is our Cowboys draft crush, for a lack of a better word. Who's going to get the rose for us that we want to see at pick number 24?
Sounds good.
Do you have a Bachelorette history?
Never watched it once in my life. Never seen it.
Joey, do you kind of have? I could see you being a Bachelorette guy.
This is actually the first year that I tuned in a little. My girlfriend watched it, so I watched it with her. Yeah, so shout out to Joey and Kelsey A.
Wow.
Winners this year, yeah.
So I heard there was drama, Joey, on at the end. Was there drama?
At the end, no. I feel like the end was drama free. There was drama in the middle though.
Okay.
So, oh gosh, I don't know how deep you want me to get into this. I'll give a quick 20-second synopsis.
TLDR.
Yeah. One girl basically thought one girl named Sydney thought this other girl, Maria, was talking crap about her, even though she wasn't. And I think this whole massive misunderstanding just started a massive beef. And all the girls basically picked sides and then just duked it out. And then eventually they all were eliminated. But it was interesting. It was interesting. There was one side that was obviously very right too, which made it funny. So everyone in America was voting for the Maria side, and everyone hated Sydney. Yeah.
Were you and the girlfriend on the same page, or were you guys torn?
No, we were on the same page. I didn't develop, I don't think, a strong enough opinion on that, but it's funny. Honestly, just watching that show is comedy more than anything. And seeing the stuff that they do behind the scenes, like what you hear, like how they purposely try to get the people on the show super drunk so they cry more and react more and everything. It's a whole production, and just thinking of how they put it all together is interesting.
I also love how you did the total normal guy thing of oh hey, watch it with my girlfriend. That's how I got into it. But
Yeah,
by episode 2, I am in.
By episode 2, I was watching it alone. I couldn't watch it with anyone.
You're listening to podcasts about it. You have fan theories. You got your tinfoil bachelor hat ready to go. I love it.
I'm more of a Love is Blind. You familiar? Netflix.
Oh yeah.
That's my guilty pleasure.
Fun fact: a casting director reached out to me to see if I was interested in Love is Blind Dallas. So
you would have killed it.
I would have. Yeah, but I mean, in one, I bet you, I even heard from someone else that they also got this message. So it could have been one of those things where they reached out to 250 dudes in Dallas, and and I also didn't know to take it as a compliment or not, because maybe I've got a good personality, but then you reveal me and they're ugh,
your voice behind a wall. Come on,
yeah, dude, that's a 10, right? But in person, it's I'm setting too high expectations for myself.
And then the curtain drops and that 5'8" stud is standing there.
Just ready to roll. Did you ever hear, sorry, we're going on a quick aside here. Did you ever hear the Jason Kelsey story about how he first met his wife?
No.
It was I think it was at, Joey, you've heard this?
Yeah, he was at a bar, right?
Yeah, he was at a bar in Cincinnati, and I believe that night he got blacked out drunk. And that's the first time they met. And I think his theory was, hey, if I set the lowest bar possible, all I can do is impress moving forward. And
good point.
I mean, hey, I kind of respect it.
I'm pretty sure he fell asleep at the bar.
Yep. Yeah.
That's true.
And then he went all in from there, so there you go. He was ready to, the relationship was there and they got married, and obviously now we know where they're at. So, all right, well, let's go back to the chase for the rose here. Okay, first round, we've got 16 players, so we got 8 matchups, and what we used to kind of do the seeding here was we went through Daniel Jeremiah's big board, his top 50. Shout out to DJ, obviously does an incredible job every year. And so that's what we used just to do the seeding. So it was just number 1 seed was the highest guy that we thought was possible on the board. Number 16 was the lowest ranked guy that we also thought would be possible at 24 on the board. And so we did that. So Dan, first up, so the format, by the way, we're going to kind of talk about this. We're going to duke it out. Our goal is to come to an agreement on who should advance. And if we can't, we're going to flip it over to Joey, who's going to be our all-knowing, all-seeing tiebreaker. Just the voice of reason on this podcast.
The voice of Joey.
The voice of Joey, the controller of chaos himself, the breaker of chains, the Aliberti machine. I don't know. I've lost.
The breaker of chains. That's a good one.
Yeah, Game of Thrones Joe. All right. So first up, though, we have the number 1 seed, and it's Talisi Fuaga offensive tackle from Oregon State. And obviously the Cowboys have a big offensive tackle need. So I don't think Joe Alt would be around by 24. I feel pretty confident with that one.
No.
So that's going to be our 1 seed. Against 16 seed, and this is, I don't know if this is UMBC Virginia, but this is at least kind of interesting. Linebacker Peyton Wilson, NC State, who is blowing people away in the draft process with his speed and athleticism. I think Daniel Jeremiah said that he looks like, who's the guy from Step Brothers, not Will Ferrell? John C. Reilly.
John C. Reilly.
Yeah, that he looks like John C. Reilly if he went back in time and just lived in the gym, which I think is one of the funniest quotes I've ever heard in a live broadcast. Look him up. The curly hair is legit. So anyways, all right, Dan, 1 seed, Fuaga, 16 seed, Peyton Wilson, ding, ding. Who are you taking and why?
I see him more as a Fairleigh Dickinson, personally, as a 16 seed. That's just me. But I do like Wilson. The guy's a tackling machine. The production is off the charts at NC State. Good leadership, team captain, all the things you want. Unfortunately, I think it comes down to positional need here. Before the Kendrick signing, I think the linebacker was a little more urgent to sign or to draft. But now that you got Kendricks, you got Overshawn coming back, I think I'd hold off on linebacker a little bit. And then Fuaga, just an absolute mauler. Dream scenario, he'd be there at 24. I don't foresee him being there. If he was, great. But for me, this one's really no debate. It'd be Fuaga all day. I would run that card up to the podium.
I would too. I do think that the one concern I have with Fuaga, and actually, so one thing about offensive line play, and Danny's an former offensive lineman, all county at what, 180 pounds? What were you, Dan?
202.
So 202 going up, all county in the Bay Area. So, I mean, that dude, he's a mauler. Danny Morales, high school tape mauler. Anyways.
15 years.
So offensive lineman, Dan, right? I don't, that well. I listen to other people talk about offensive linemen. And one guy recently, I heard Jeff Schwartz, former NFL offensive lineman, former Oregon Duck, Ducks, talking about offensive linemen. And his one concern with Fuaga is that he might be more of a guard than tackle ultimately in terms of his best position. He brought up the point that kind of would get beat outside the edge, but because the Oregon State doesn't drop back too much with DJU last year, that allowed guys to run past his shoulder, and that's totally fine. You take the edge. It doesn't matter. You're not going to get to the QB in time. I just watching him, the brief I've watched him, I think that he could obviously play tackle. I think he could do well in the run game, which I think, if you kind of look at Tyron last year, was dominant in pass pro, not as equivalent in the run blocking game. So I'm with you. I would take Fuaga. I don't think there's perfect prospects that you're going to get at 24. I don't think he'll be there at 24.
No.
Quick question, Danny. Peyton Wilson, though, trade back candidate, maybe? Or if he's still there in the second round, maybe you jump for joy? What do you think about that, even with Eric Kendricks?
I just think there's such a need on the O-line, and it's such an important position that to trade back, to take a linebacker with your first pick, I just can't really stomach that one. I'd love to get Peyton Wilson in the third. I don't know if he'd be there. Probably wouldn't. But I think there's bigger holes on this roster. Great player, not a great fit, just considering the roster construction right now.
All right. Well, we have Fuaga moving on. And next episode, we're going to do the second round. So we're going to leave that for today. Fuaga advances. He can breathe. He can relax. He's safe. Okay. The rose is still in his sights.
He's made it one more week.
He has made it one more week. Next week we'll see. All right, next round. And, I love a good 8-9 matchup because it can go either way. And I think we might have that here. We have 2 offensive tackles this time. There's going to be a lot of them. Spoiler alert. 9 seed, we have Oklahoma offensive tackle Tyler Guyton. And at number 8 seed, we have Georgia offensive tackle Amarius Mims. I'll start us off this time, Dan. I'm taking Amarius Mims here between those two. And you're already shaking your head, so I'm excited to see where this goes. They're both very big. They're both monsters. I think Amarius Mims, from just a talent standpoint, has a little bit of edge over Guyton. And I also think, and this is kind of maybe a little where it gets a little unique. And again, I am not an offensive line expert. This is just from my viewing and hearing other people. I think Amarius Mims might be more ready to go than Tyler Guyton. I think less raw, or at least maybe, to use draft terms, his ceiling or his floor might be a little bit higher than Guyton, which is a little bit curious because Amarius Mims does not have a lot of playing time. Really only like one full season at Georgia with a couple other games in there. But I think that'd be too much of a talent, boom or bust, to pass up at 24. I think Guyton's a little bit more raw. He's also a right tackle, and I know that Dylan Gabriel is a left-handed quarterback, so he was playing blindside blocker for Oklahoma. So I like Amarius Mims there. That's kind of my take.
I'm gonna have to push back on that one, and there's no Oklahoma bias, none there. That is that's my team, but the fact that he was a 3-star, I think he went to TCU as a D lineman, I believe.
A tight end, I believe.
Tight end.
Yeah.
So the position's still new to him, and I flipped on the Reese's Senior Bowl, and to watch that guy move, and then to see him in the run game, the way he got to that second level and was cutting off linebackers, I'm like, that's what this team needs. That's the answer. No offense, Chuma Edoga is not the answer. And so a guy like Guy, to see him move like that and the athleticism, and to see how far he's progressed with such little experience at the position, it's just as an O-lineman, it's like that's what we need. I think the potential's through the roof. The size is there, the hands are there, the footwork. That'd be my guy for sure. I don't dislike Mims, but I think if you're just comparing him to Guyton, Guyton's the guy. Mims is a little more, to me, he seems a little more top heavy. He doesn't seem as polished. I don't know how much potential's there. That's kind of why I'm just not a huge Mims guy. If Guyton was off the board and Mims was sitting there at 24, I wouldn't hate the pick. But I think if Guyton's there, he's our guy.
Yeah, so we disagree. Joey, the breaker of ties himself, who do you pick to advance?
I want to preface this by saying I am also not an offensive line expert, but I definitely do a little digging, see what other people that know stuff about offensive linemen think. And with that research, I would also lean towards Amarius Mims with Georgia. I just think both are huge. Mims is bigger, and it just seems like the ceiling with him is there compared to the ceiling with Guyton. And it's just, I don't know, just little things that I saw and heard just made it seem like Mims is this guy that could jump up into the top 15 maybe, where Guyton, I feel like he's kind of locked into that like late teens to late 20s range. Teams seem to be really high on Mims. Obviously, he only played 8 games at Georgia because of injuries and being behind Broderick Jones or whatever other tackles were there. But I just think he's so huge. And Danny, like you said about Guyton, I think Mims moves great for his size too. At like 6'8", 340, he can move. So I think that if it were to be between those two people, Mims would have to be the choice.
He does move. I'll give him that. I just couldn't help but notice how top heavy he looked in his pass sets. And I think against NFL pass rushers, they're going to eat him alive. And I think people are falling in love with that size. Just me getting nitpicky, but again, I just love the way Guyton moved, especially in the run game. To see him cut off linebackers on that second level in that zone scheme, I think he's perfect for a zone scheme. I think Guyton's the guy. But you guys, whatever. That's your opinion. That's your opinion.
You can't disagree with the all-seeing Joey. Okay, this is the voice of reason. You got to accept it at the end of the day. Okay, Dan?
We can agree to disagree, but sure. Okay.
Fair. I also think that's an interesting matchup just because they're two kind of similar guys in terms of like raw, but also big, but also can move, but also have some fundamental qualms,
Who was also raw and athletic coming out of college? Tyron Smith. So
yeah, good segue, Dan. I was going to mention, I think it's also important to note that this pick will likely replace Tyron Smith, but Cowboys fans should, not expect Tyron Smith 2.0 at least right away.
Tyron Smith wasn't the Tyron Smith we came to love right away. He had some growing pains. He he had his struggles early.
Yeah, I will say though, I've covered a lot of college football, and last year was my first year covering the NFL. Dude was made in a lab. That guy's crazy. Like to just
Tyron?
look tyrant. Yeah, just to look at. It's like
Oh, if those big paws lock onto you, you're done.
Michael
Oh,
Gelkin from the Dallas Morning News wrote an incredible feature just on his hands. Literally, just the whole feature was about his hands, and great read. Definitely worth checking out. All right, now we're moving on to our next matchup, um, which is Brian Thomas, LSU wide receiver, versus Duke offensive line Graham Barton. Both had pro days recently. Robert Prince, the Cowboys wide receiving coach, was at LSU checking Brian Thomas, maybe Malik Neighbors out. Talk about all in. Let's go get Malik Neighbors, right? No. So then, and then Duke offensive line Graham Barton was also had his pro day, I think yesterday, Thursday.
yeah.
Um,
Yesterday.
anyways, Danny, you're up first in this one.
Sure.
For time purposes, we'll probably move it a little bit faster to get through this first round. So, but what do you think? Who's your pick here?
This one's easy for me. It's Graham Barton all day. I would love if he was there at 24. Again, the amount of holes on the O-line and the amount of boxes that Graham Barton can fill. The guy's a stud. Center, guard, tackle, not ideal, but if you needed him there, you can. I just think he fits exactly what we need right now. Thomas, he's good. He wasn't the one on his own team, but he's a stud. But I don't think the hole for a third receiver warrants a first-round pick.
No, and it doesn't, in my opinion. So I agree with you there. The plot twist is though, I think just would be a lot of fun to have that. And we had a mock draft the other day on Lone Star Live, and I took another player here that Amaris Mims was actually on the board, and I went away from offensive line and I went more of the fun pick. I think talking about the all-in stuff, Danny, Cowboys fans are a little disenchanted right now. I think they could use a spark, get some juice. I think Brian Thomas, who in my opinion, he stood out a lot last year at LSU, and I know Malik Neighbors is Malik Neighbors, and I know Jaden Daniels threw for 1,000,000 yards, so obviously they had to go somewhere. Brian Thomas is, especially his just high pointing and his ability to make contested catches, really stuck out to me. I thought he was fantastic. I think that is your Michael Gallup replacement, and again, talking about needs, not on the highest need at all. No. But having a big body leaping a receiver with your number three at your number 3 spot to go with Brandon Cooks and CeeDee Lamb is something that they could use. So for fun, I'm going to go Brian Thomas here if he falls to 24. And that means we go back to the all-seeing Joey Aliberti, the breaker of ties himself.
Fun does not win. Smart wins. That's what we need.
But Cowboys haven't been in the NFC Championship since 95. Let's have fun. Okay, go ahead.
I want to say that you guys were saying need for a third wide receiver. Totally understand that because Brandon Cooks is good, but Brandon Cooks is old. He's not going to be there forever. I think if they did draft Brian Thomas, he would be that eventual replacement in that second guy alongside CeeDee Lamb. With that being said, I agree with Danny. I think Graham Barton just makes too much sense. He gets a lot of hate at left tackle because he doesn't have the length, and he's probably going to be a guard or a center, which whatever. Cowboys need that too. But yeah, as boring of a pick as Graham Barton might be, he's, I think, much more necessary to this team's success than Brian Thomas right now. And I think, honestly, I think there's some guys, there's so many needs that I feel like Cowboys people are just saying oh, they can fix it in the draft. They only have so many draft picks. So this could definitely be a trade down thing and just try to fill up on depth. But tackle and wide receiver are super deep. And I think they could find players at both late in the later rounds and have no problem. But Graham Barton definitely does fill whatever they need them to do. So I think that just makes too much sense here.
Fair enough. Fair.
I know it's not the fun pick, but
that's fine.
Quit having so much fun, Joey. All right, we got to win.
I'm just trying to have fun here. All right. So I almost said Brian Thomas. Graham Barton advances to our second round. Another guy who gets to stay in the fight. The rose is still in his view. Next up, we've got our 13 seed Jackson Powers Johnson versus 4 seed Alabama offensive tackle J.C. Latham. And I'm going to go first this time. And for those of you who don't know, I have a bias here.
Throw it up.
Throw it up. Your boy went to Oregon. He is a Duck. So I got to watch a lot of Jackson Powers Johnson this past season. And I'll tell you, that dude is legit. Not an offensive line expert. That guy, for someone who's that big, 6'4", 6'5", 320 pounds at center to move as fast as he can. If you watch the Senior Bowl, they put him at center in one-on-ones. He dominated. You put him at guard in one-on-ones. He dominated.
Wow.
And we're talking about guys that are some of the best interior pass rushers around in this draft. If you go watch how Oregon used him in screens. Like his ability, there was one screen in particular where he beat, I think it was Bucky Irving, running back, who's another good prospect. He beat Bucky to the goal line and did like a sprinter finish on it. He's fun. Listen to an interviews. He's great. I think JC Latham is awesome too. But if both these guys were on the board, give me JPJ all day.
As crazy as it sounds, I'm going to have to agree. You look at any consensus board, they would think we are morons. Latham is the pick all day.
Well, we are morons, but go ahead.
We just like to have fun. Or you do. But the thought, just think about this. You got Tyler Smith, JPJ, Zach Martin as your interior. Think about that. That is domination. That is old school Cowboys. Run it up the gut. You know we're going to run. You ain't going to stop us. It don't matter who's in the backfield. And so just the thought of that interior three alone, you got to take Johnson there. We have, currently who? Brock Hoffman's our center. He's a good backup.
Yeah, I think Brock and the thing about Brock and TJ Bass is they prove that they can step in and do the job, which is, I think, a key thing in the NFL. And shoot, we might see, if they did this pick, Danny, if they took JPJ at 24, you might see Tyler Smith move out to left tackle. And then you have Brock Hoffman and TJ Bass competing for left guard, maybe in another draft pick later on as well, maybe like a Cooper Beebe or Christian Mahogany or something from Boston College. Anyways, sorry to take your thunder there, but if they do this pick, that's another option.
Yeah, and is Tyler Smith's best position at guard or tackle? Where does he best serve this team? He is such a dominant guard. It's like I'd hate to kick him out to tackle. But you just brought up an interesting point. Cooper Beebe, who's another one of my late round kind of man crushes. That's a lot of man in the interior. That is a lot of man. So if your left side is Smith, Beebe, and JPJ, I like that.
Zach Martin and Terrence Steele, dude.
I like that a lot.
Shoot, put Joey Aliberti back there, running back. We're gonna get some yards, man.
It wouldn't matter.
All right, so JPJ moves on. Sorry, JC Latham. This is a kind of biased podcast. Next up, we got Penn State's Olu Fashanu. I'm not going to try to say the full first name because
that sounds right.
That's a lot. And then Illinois defensive tackle Johnny Newton. I believe it's your turn to go first, Dan.
Johnny Newton, I like him. Good prospect. Do we need help on the interior of the D-line? Yes, we do. But again, I think the overarching theme we're kind of finding ourselves with is the O-line is such a glaring need. Olu could come out last year, comes back for one more year. Would have been a first-round pick last year. Guy's a stud. He's athletic, true left tackle, plug and play day one. So that'd be my guy. I don't foresee him being there at 24. I really don't. If he was, that's a no-brainer pick. Maybe even over JPJ. I don't know. Sorry, I had to ruffle your duck feathers there, but I think Olu's the guy. High football IQ. Coaches rave about him. I think he would be the guy. That way you can keep Tyler Smith at left guard. You're not kicking him out of his best position. I think that makes a ton of sense. Not that D-line's a super deep position in the draft, but there's a couple guys in the second and third round that I'm sure we'll talk about later on that I would feel just as comfortable taking and passing on Newton here.
I'm going to keep it short. I agree. Give me Olu Fashanu. Had one bad game, and that's kind of seemed to be highlighted, but people have bad games. even I have bad days on the golf course. Who would have thought? So there's that.
Have you had good days on the golf course?
Let's just let's just not talk about that. Sorry, Joe, you're not needed again. Just stay in your all-seeing cave and wait for the next one. I do think there's one defensive tackle that would intrigue me at 24, though. And is he up next? No, he's not. But we do have two defensive guys. We got 11 seed Texas A&M linebacker Edgerrin Cooper, and then we have UCLA's Leatu Latu with the 6th seed. I go first this time. Leatu Latu is actually the guy I picked in our mock draft when we had Amarius Mims still on the board at 24. I think the idea of pairing him with Micah Parsons and letting those two chase a quarterback is an incredibly fun pick. There you go, another fun one. But I think it's also valuable. I think that, I think that they need to. I think that their ability to use Micah Parsons in many different positions is fascinating. But I think you need to have someone that can also keep presence on the edge. I thought Dante Fowler at times actually kind of did that, but then they kind of went away from him. So I think give me another elite pass rush to put on the edge. That would allow Micah Parsons and let's say Eric Kendricks to do that double A gap mug that Mike Zimmer likes to run, and with just thread and everything in the interior while you still have someone on the outside. I think he's the best pure pass rusher in the draft, in my opinion. He's very fun to watch. That's my pick.
I agree. I think your fun prevails here. Prior to the, there you go, a little fist pump. I think prior to the Kendrick signing, I was huge. I mean, I still am a Cooper fan. He's an athletic freak. Just the thought of pairing him up with Micah, with Damone Clark, I think Zimmer could do some fun stuff with him. But now that we're drafting a linebacker for a depth piece, a rotational piece, because we got those two set. I think Latu is the guy. I don't love him. He's not my favorite prospect in the draft. But the ability to get to the quarterback is pretty undeniable. And I think the Cowboys are going to need a little bit of that this year. So I think Latu's the guy.
You know what's wild about you not being the biggest fan of Latu is the fact that he was a volunteer firefighter. Like, before he got back into pass rushing. And Danny, you're a firefighter. Like, that's your kindred spirit.
But I'm a Cowboys fan first and foremost. So I gotta do what's best for the boys here, Joe. So.
You passed the test. Joey, stay in your cave again. Our third eye Raven himself. You'll come out eventually. We have another defensive matchup here. 7 seed Texas defensive tackle Byron Murphy II, and 10 seed Chop Robinson from Penn State, another Penn State pass rusher. Danny, who do you got?
I do like those Penn State defenders. That's a long lineage of success in the NFL. But as much as it pains me to say, as a Sooners fan, I'm going to go with the Horns here. Byron Murphy is an athletic. There you go. Okay. He is an athletic freak. You see that guy. It's pretty incredible, the things he can do from that 3 technique. You can kick him down on a 1. You can even kick him outside of the edge if you had to. I think he would be incredible. You pair him up with Mozzie Smith, you're set in the interior for the next 10 years. Give us a little more stoutness, a little more beef up front. He'd be my guy.
He had the best. I said that Daniel Jeremiah was the best quote of the combine. He might have had the best one too, where he said he came out of the womb jacked, like shredded. Like, and you look at that dude. It's hard not to make the Aaron Donald comp, and if you look at their speed and stuff, different. Aaron's faster. But that ability to just have so much pass rushing ability from the interior and just his strength, I think they're a little bit different. I think more run focused with Byron, but I think that's what you would need for the Cowboys. And I think that would pair him with Osa too, Odigizua. It's pretty, all of a sudden you're cooking with a little bit of gas there. Byron Murphy. So I used to cover high school sports for the Dallas Morning News. Byron Murphy was the guy at DeSoto High School. And they had at DeSoto, they had him and a guy named Shamar Turner, who's at A&M right now, was another DeSoto guy. Their defense was incredible. The fact that, Byron Murphy used to be a running back growing up, you can see it, man. He's one of those guys that's kind of been slept on his entire life. He was a 3-star recruit that was committed to Utah or Baylor, I believe. I think it was Baylor. And then switches to Texas last minute, thrives there. And I think he's finally getting the shine that he deserves. I'd go Byron Murphy. So, Joey, stay in the cave. The third eye Raven is not coming out. He's in the cage. He's in the cage in the cave.
A lot of Game of Thrones references here, Joe.
I know, and I haven't seen that. I haven't seen House of Dragon. I need to watch that. Are you watching that? Any of you?
You're not missing much. That's just my take.
Wow. I disagree. I think it's better than the first season of Game of Thrones.
Oh my god.
Starts off faster. Game of Thrones is a slow cook, which I love
was.
about Game of Thrones.
But once it
House of
starts
Dragon-
cooking,
Huh? Oh, it starts
once
cooking.
that show starts cooking, ooh.
Yes, yeah. House of Dragon, though, it got off to a hot start, and it definitely has my attention. I'm excited for June.
All right, well, I'll check it out. I need to. I have HBO. Game of Thrones, the original one, was kind of though like it was like a slow burn. It was a slow cook, and then it was cooking. But then it's like, is it a creme brulee or a souffle? What's the cake that like if you don't do it right, it like falls in? Is that creme brulee? Souffle?
Creme brulee is a dessert.
So it's not creme brulee. No, it's this. I think it's dude. I don't know. I'm not.
I don't even know what a souffle is.
But you know what I'm talking about? That cake that like it comes out if it's perfect out of the oven, it's like great. But then if it's not, it just like falls in on itself.
I think it's souffle because creme brulee is like colder.
Yeah, you're right.
Creme brulee's got that hard sugar shell.
Yeah, no, that's right. This is a food podcast.
Stick to sports, huh?
All right, last one. We got 15 seed West Virginia offensive lineman Zach Frazier going against 2 seed Washington offensive tackle Troy Fautanu. And I go first here. From like a who will be there at 24, Frazier will be there, I think.
No doubt.
Fautanu, I do not think will be there. So in that regard, you got to go. I mean, if it's who's better, give me Fautanu, obviously. I like Zach Frazier, though, and for the fun of not only who will be there at 24 and the fact that we could have a 15-2 seed upset, give me Zach Frazier. I think that if the Cowboys trade back, Zach Frazier would be awesome. I got him actually in the second round in our mock draft for the Cowboys. So they went Latu, Zach Frazier. In that scenario, you kick Tyler Smith out to left tackle. Maybe you go Christian Mahogany, Cooper Beebe. Then you're just – I like that. Anyways, give me Zach Frazier. I think the dude is tough. And I think that sometimes there's a lot of overhyped hype on like one play to find someone as tough. I think a lot of football players are tough. But literally the dude was like, when he broke his leg, was like trying to get off the field with a broken leg and like doing everything he could. And I was just like, man, that guy's kind of a baller. So anyways, watch him play though. That toughness replicates itself there. He's a mauler. I think that you put him at center for the Cowboys. You're opening up some interior holes, which I think wasn't Tyler Biadish's best asset last year in run blocking. So that's my take. Give me the 15 seed. Give me Cinderella.
Wrong. I'm going to go with the correct choice, which is Fautanu, because there's a reason why he's not going to be there at 24, Joe. So I remember watching a Washington game. I forgot which one it was, but no idea who Fautanu was at this point. I'm watching the Huskies. I see this left tackle with his shirt rolled up, super high pants, and just to see the guy move like a slot receiver from the left tackle position, I'm like, who is this guy? And I do a little research. He's coming out in the draft. I'm like, that's the guy that I want. That's the guy we need. That's what we've been missing. So a little bit of a man crush. Fautanu would be kind of a dream scenario at 24, I think, for the Cowboys. I do have a little bit of a concern how he holds up at left tackle. He's not the biggest guy, but I would have no problem kicking him to guard. Just the thought of him pulling, coming around, lead blocking, like that's some pretty good stuff. In terms of Frazier, I do like him. If the Cowboys entertain the idea of trading down in the draft, say to 30, 31, 32, I think he's a prime candidate. Get a little more draft capital. But I think if they're both there, you got to go Fautanu.
Yeah, if they're both there, you got to do it. But I go Frazier because fun. So Joey, oh wait, do you hear that? That's the cave. It's being opened. The all-seeing third eye raven is flying out. Joey, the breaker of ties himself. What do you have to say?
Let the voice of reason speak here.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from with the fun narrative with Frazier, but you also used a criteria that you hadn't used for the rest of them. You said that Fautanu most likely won't be there, so I'm not going to pick him because I want to pick Zach Frazier. You didn't use that for anyone else.
I didn't because I wanted to. That's the fun part of this. It's not that Who says a center is fun unless they're Jackson Powers Johnson? I think it'd be fun just to have a 15 seed advance in this, and that's just what I'm doing. Because guess what? It's my part of my podcast, and I helped create the bracket, and you know what? I wanted to have fun, but you're the all-seer breaker of ties, so let's hear it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Joe, but your dream of having a 15 seed advance in this scenario is going to be crushed. Troy Fatanu, I think one of the for realistic landing spot at 24. I also don't think he'll be there, but I think that'd be perfect in the sense that he can play tackle. It feels like most people will think he'll play guard, similar to Graham Barton, but it feels like compared to Graham Barton, it feels like more people are optimistic that Otanu could play tackle compared to Barton, where he just seems like he's locked into the interior. So I think, and I agree with Danny, the way that he was moving all season, but you saw it especially on Blast in the college football playoff. Like he can move well, and I think that would be. I honestly think that'd be more fun to see than Zach Frazier in a Cowboys uniform. But who am I to say?
I also think too, if they were to take Fatanu or Fuaga or Graham Barton, less so Graham Barton, it opens up the idea that shoot, maybe you move Tyler Smith to left tackle and Fatanu plays left guard. I mean, you know, we'll see. That's something that at least.
Can I offer another solution? What if Tyler Smith moves to left tackle and then they say, you know, we've dealt with too many of these Terrence Steele struggles. We want to get someone to play right tackle. So then, you know, you have two sure-handed guys on the outside. I don't know exactly what they would do with Terrence Steele. Maybe they move him into guard, or maybe they just say, you know, see you later. I have no idea. I don't know what if the contract would allow that with dead cap and all that good stuff. But I think that could be a very feasible option and would probably, or like, I feel like have a chance of being their most effective in terms of having the best offensive line out there.
Yeah, that'd be intriguing. And going back to the quiet rebuilding thing, that's part of one of the things the Cowboys could have done this offseason was restructure Terrence Steele. When you don't restructure, the reason, if you restructure someone, you're kind of also committing to them for a little bit, or at least their contract. They didn't. He signed a big contract last year. It's something to monitor. Terrence had a lot of pass pressures. He admittedly had struggles last season. He was coming off a major injury. They signed him an extension, and you know there were points last year where some pass rushers got the best of him. So interesting option. So all right, recapping, who's still alive in the chase for the Rose? We have the number 1 seed from Oregon State, Talisi Fuaga. We've got Georgia offensive tackle Marius Mims, the 8th seed. We've got 12 seed Graham Barton, even though, you know, Brian Thomas would have been fun. We've got 13 seed Jackson Powers Johnson. We've got 3 seed Olu Fashanu. We have 6 seed defensive end Liatu Latu. We have 7 seed defensive tackle from Texas Byron Murphy II. And we have Washington offensive tackle Troy Fatanu as the number 2 seed. So those are people still alive. We'll see next episode who advances from them as we get to the Elite 8 of our Chase for the Rose. That's our first episode. How About That podcast is now a thing. It is number 1 episodes in the books. Kind of a tough time to go against some of these big happenings in sports right now. Just kidding, because I think we're awesome. So that's episode 1. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please go to LoneStarLive.com and read my coverage and Joey's coverage. We'll have a lot of Cowboys stuff moving forward. The draft is coming up. Mini camps are around the corner. You know, football season never really sleeps, and we're here to kind of narrate through the entirety of it. So thank you so much. Thank you. Tell your friends, share, all that stuff. Give us a good rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And that's it. How About That podcast?
Thanks for listening to How About That podcast.